Good evening, it's Thursday 24th of April and here's what's making news around the world on World News Tonight. Vatican Vigil. Thousands gather to mourn Pope Francis at St. Peter's Square. Turkey earthquake. 6.2 magnitude quake strikes Istanbul, over 150 injured. Veteran honored. South Carolina community gifts new home to war hero.
From Colombo, this is World News Tonight with Yasiru Bitana.
Good evening once again. Thousands gather in St. Peter's Square as the world mourns Pope Francis, the first Latin American pontiff, remembered for his humility, reformist stance, and efforts to bring compassion and inclusivity to the Catholic Church.
Thousands of people queue in St. Peter's Square to say a last farewell to Pope Francis. After his body was brought to St. Peter's Basilica, tens of thousands are offering their final goodbye over the 3 days of public mourning. Pope Francis' body, dressed in red vestments and a white mitre, was displayed lying at an angle on a simple wooden coffin. Unlike in the past, his coffin was placed lower, closer to the ground, reflecting his humility and his love for the poor and vulnerable. Italian media outlets reported that more than 100,000 people were waiting to enter, with lines so long that people had to wait at least 4 hours to pay their respects inside the basilica. The Vatican initially planned to accept mourners until midnight on the first day. On the second day, public mourning will be allowed from 7 a.m. to midnight local time, and on the final day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. It also stated that the hours could be extended depending on the crowd size. Pope Francis' funeral mass will be held on April 26th at 10 a.m. local time in St. Peter's Square. The conclave, the secret meeting of cardinals, is expected to take place between May 5th and 10th.
A powerful 6.2 magnitude earthquake jolts Istanbul, injuring over 150 people and causing widespread panic as residents flee buildings, fearing aftershocks in one of Turkey's most densely populated cities.
There were panicked moments in Turkey this morning as a 6.2 earthquake rocked several cities in the western part of the country. The tremors caused the minaret of Istanbul's famed Fatih Sultan Mehmet Mosque to sway in the air. Elsewhere, the quake knocked down shelves, shook buildings, and rattled nerves. Many people fled into the streets to avoid being caught in a building collapse. Only one such collapse has been reported, that of an abandoned structure in Istanbul. The country is no stranger to seismic activity, and memories of a devastating 2023 earthquake that struck Turkey and Syria are still fresh. Over 50,000 people died in that disaster. This week's quake seems mild in comparison, though still powerful. Authorities say there have been dozens of aftershocks and report over 100 hospitalizations. There are no reported fatalities.
India downgraded its diplomatic relations with Pakistan following a deadly terror attack in Kashmir, suspending trade and visa services and reigniting long-standing hostilities between the two nuclear-armed neighbors over cross-border extremism.
While Indian Interior Minister Amit Shah was flown into Kashmir on Wednesday morning, where he visited the scene of Tuesday's mass shooting and paid his respects to victims, anger reigned in towns across the Jammu and Kashmir region. With the gunmen still at large, tens of thousands of armed police and soldiers have been deployed across the region. And in Pahalgam, a picturesque village in the Himalayan foothills, shops and businesses are closed and tourists are packing their bags. Tourists have crammed into taxis and buses to evacuate the area, and Air India have laid on additional flights to accommodate them. A disputed territory, the Kashmir region is administered in part by New Delhi and in part by Islamabad. and the Indian portion has seen decades of insurgency against New Delhi rule. But violence has calmed in recent years, making Tuesday's attack the bloodiest since the year 2000. It has been claimed by the previously unknown Kashmir Resistance militant group. Upon hearing of the shooting, Prime Minister Narendra Modi cut short a visit to Saudi Arabia to return to India early on Wednesday.
US President Donald Trump says it's up to China how soon the tariffs can come down. These comments come amid reports that Washington is looking to cut its tariffs on Chinese imports to ease tensions between the two largest economies.
Currently, U.S. President Donald Trump has set tariffs on Chinese imports at 145%. According to the U.S. leader, that number could come down significantly, but it'll be up to China. Trump also hinted a new tariff rate on Chinese imports could be decided in 2 to 3 weeks. He also warned that if there is no deal between the two sides, Washington will unilaterally set the tariff rate. Trump added that if China is unwilling to do business with the U.S., the rate will remain at 145%. The comments come amid reports that the Trump administration is looking into lowering the tariff rate for China to the 50 to 65% range. Trump also hinted at de-escalating tensions with China by saying on Tuesday that 145% is too high and that it will come down substantially. Meanwhile, in another turnaround from the U.S. leader, he's now planning to exempt car makers from some U.S. auto tariffs. According to the Financial Times on Thursday, the latest move would exempt car parts from the tariffs that Trump has imposed on Chinese imports over the country's fentanyl production. It also includes levies on steel and aluminum products. Washington has been collecting a 25% tax on every car not assembled in the U.S., and a 25% tax on some imported auto parts is set to go into effect early May. Meanwhile, South Korea's Industry Minister An Duk-eun said Wednesday that Seoul aims to remove the Trump administration's reciprocal tariffs. An made the remarks upon arriving in the U.S. to hold talks with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer for 2+2 consultations over tariff and other issues. The minister expressed optimism that the talks will allow reciprocal tariffs on Seoul to remain suspended.
South Korean authorities accused Chinese AI firm Deepseek of illegally transferring user data and prompts overseas, prompting national investigations and growing concerns over digital privacy violations and foreign surveillance.
South Korea's data protection watchdog has flagged a major privacy breach involving Chinese artificial intelligence company Deepseek. The agency says user data and even AI-generated prompt content were transferred abroad without user consent. According to the Personal Information Protection Commission, Deepseek began collecting and transferring data to several companies in China and the United States during its launch in South Korea back in January. The information reportedly included device data, network details, and user-generated AI prompts, all sent to a Beijing-based firm called Volcano Engine, part of ByteDance, without prior user approval. In February, South Korean regulators responded by suspending new downloads of the Deepseek app, citing violations of local data protection rules. Deepseek later claimed the data sharing was aimed at improving user experience and said it blocked further transfers of AI prompt content starting April 10. But the explanation has not eased regulatory pressure. The Commission is now recommending that Deepseek erase all previously transferred AI prompt data and establish a legal basis for any future cross-border data transfers. As of now, Deepseek has not publicly commented on the matter and could face further scrutiny as data governance standards tighten across Asia.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. US Senator Marco Rubio insists Iran must hold uranium enrichment under any future nuclear agreement, allowing only civilian imports, a move aimed at curbing Tehran's potential path towards a nuclear weapons development.
As the US and Iran head into a new round of nuclear talks in Oman, a firm message is coming from Washington: Iran must stop enriching uranium entirely if it wants a deal. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio reiterated that any peaceful civilian program must rely on imported enriched uranium like other nations do, and that Iran's enrichment poses too great a proliferation risk. Rubio's comments echo a broader stance under President Donald Trump's maximum pressure campaign, one marked by sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and even threats of military action. But Iran is pushing back. A senior Iranian official dismissed the US stance, saying zero enrichment is unacceptable, and insisted their program is entirely peaceful and within sovereign rights. The UN nuclear watchdog has raised red flags, reporting that Iran is enriching uranium at levels close to weapons grade, up to 60% purity, a step that alarms Western powers. US envoy Steve Witkoff has also clarified that Iran must stop and eliminate enrichment, stressing there is no civilian need to go beyond 3.67%. The road ahead remains fraught. As both sides dig in, the world watches closely, caught between diplomacy and a standoff that could spiral into broader conflict.
Tensions rise as Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky clash over US peace terms, with Zelensky refusing concessions on Russian-occupied territory and Trump urging a swift resolution to the conflict.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky clashed again on Wednesday on efforts to end the three-year-old war in Ukraine. Trump chided Zelensky in a Truth Social post for refusing to recognize Russia's occupation of Crimea. He said the territory was lost years ago and, quote, is not even a point of discussion. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt elaborated in comments to reporters.
The president's frustrated. His patience is running very thin. He wants to do what's right for the world. He wants to see peace. He wants to see the killing stopped. But you need both sides of the war willing to do that. And unfortunately, President Zelensky seems to be moving in the wrong direction.
Zelensky said this week that Ukraine will not recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea, saying, quote, there's nothing to talk about here. This is against our Constitution. His chief of staff said in a post on X that he stressed to the U.S. in talks Wednesday that Ukraine will stand firm on its principles regarding sovereignty and territorial integrity. Nevertheless, Ukraine's foreign minister said after those discussions that Kyiv was committed to working with the U.S. to achieve peace.
El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele publicly criticizes Venezuela's Maduro for rejecting a proposal on prisoner swap, escalating diplomatic friction and reigniting debates over political prisoners and regional cooperation.
Here, in Venezuela's capital, an effigy of the President of El Salvador and photos of U.S. President Donald Trump burn in the streets. The public outrage comes as the two leaders angered Venezuelan officials. Since March, the United States has deported over 200 Venezuelans to El Salvador. They are accused of being members of the notorious Tren de la Aragua gang, which many of their relatives and lawyers deny. On Sunday, the country's president offered to repatriate 252 Venezuelans in exchange for the same number of Salvadorans who he considers to be political prisoners.
Unlike our detainees, many of whom have committed murder and rape, and others who have been arrested multiple times before being deported, your political prisoners have committed no crime. The only reason they are imprisoned is because they opposed you and your electoral fraud.
But Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro rejected the proposal, describing the detention of its citizens in El Salvador as kidnapping.
Judicialmente hablando,
he acknowledges El Salvador has 252 Venezuelans in prisons at its disposal, without trial, without judges, the right to due process, the right to defense, and he refuses to publish proof of life for each of them.
The Venezuelans in question are currently being held in El Salvador's CICOT high-security prison that critics have called a black hole for human rights. On Saturday, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to pause its deportation of alleged gang members to El Salvador. a ruling which Trump has publicly challenged.
Top US security officials and analysts called for continued investment in nuclear deterrence, arguing it remains a cornerstone of national defense amid rising geopolitical instability and emerging global threats.
Nuclear deterrence and alliances should not be neglected but bolstered by the United States as geopolitical tensions and global conflicts continue 3 months into the second Trump administration. That's according to officials and experts at the annual ASEAN plenum in Seoul. As concerns grow over the lack of messaging on Washington's security commitment to its allies, Kurt Campbell, former US Deputy Secretary of State, raised the need for confidence building, noting North Korea's nuclear threat, Russia's potential use of nuclear weapons, and the largest nuclear buildup of modern times in China.
My own view is that over time we're going to need to do more, and we're going to need to involve our key allies, Japan and the ROK, more in decision-making around military and nuclear use, much in the way we did in Europe during parts of the Cold War.
Campbell also called for Seoul to have greater representation as an addition to the G7 or the Quad, saying its contributions to global governance are dearly valued. On trade concerns, as America rolls out reciprocal tariffs against its trading partners, the former diplomat expressed optimism towards the, quote, ingenuity and the determination by Seoul's trade officials, who have travelled to Washington, D.C. for ministerial consultations this week. Former US White House official Victor Cha said Trump has unlocked many new opportunities of cooperation that were previously unthinkable.
So the most obvious of these is shipbuilding, where the United States needs help. Korea is very successful in that area. Strategic energy cooperation, where South Korea doesn't need to rely on unreliable supplies from the Gulf, but get energy from the United States.
Highlighting 80 years since the end of World War II that liberated South Korea from Japan's colonization, Seoul's Foreign Minister Cho Tae-ho warned against naked self-interest that led to war in the past. As two key democratic players in the Indo-Pacific, Cho highlighted Seoul and Tokyo's dramatic improvement of relations over the past 3 years, saying their partnership is not a choice but a necessity. The two nations commemorate 60 years of normalizing bilateral ties this year. Amid the US-China rivalry, Cho said South Korea and Japan can encourage China's constructive role and prevent escalations in the region. Tokyo's ambassador to Seoul also called for continued trilateral cooperation with the US to strengthen deterrence and foster regional stability and prosperity.
China and Kenya upgrade diplomatic ties, signing new economic and security agreements in a show of deepening bilateral cooperation amid growing Chinese influence across Africa during turbulent geopolitical times.
Beijing welcomed Kenyan President William Ruto with a red carpet and renewed ambition. In a joint announcement with Chinese President Xi Jinping, both nations said they were elevating ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The upgraded partnership comes in the face of a turbulent international situation. Both leaders said calling it a move to bring stability, strengthen multilateralism, and safeguard the interests of developing countries. China, already Kenya's biggest bilateral lender, has played a central role in funding infrastructure through its Belt and Road Initiative, including the iconic Mombasa-Nairobi Railway. Ruto and Xi signed 20 agreements, covering areas from science and tech to e-commerce, vocational education, water resources, transport system, and military exchanges. Kenya is also seeking Chinese funding to extend its railway line to the Ugandan border, a major step in boosting regional trade and connectivity across East Africa. Amid a heavy debt burden, President Ruto has pledged that Kenya will not default, stressing transparency and reform while still quoting investment for growth. The two sides also denounced unilateral sanctions and economic decoupling, calling for stronger defense cooperation, joint military training, and possible direct Beijing-Nairobi flights to enhance people-to-people ties.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news right after this. Welcome back. In a heartwarming gesture, a South Carolina community comes together to build and donate a new home to a local veteran, honoring his service with a fresh start and a nationwide praise. Take a look.
This isn't just a police escort. It's the sound of coming home for the first time. That's Marine Corps veteran Morgan Strain, and the South Carolina house he's visiting is actually his new home. This sign outside says it all: home for a hero. And on the street, a hero's welcome.
We realized we got the home before they said anything, and we were a hot mess, cried ourselves into a headache.
Inside, messages of support from his new community. For Morgan's wife, Kemi, it was everything.
I don't even have the words to know that all this love is at the center of our home.
Construction company Lennar Homes and veterans charity Operation Patriot's Fob organized a surprise. But that wasn't Morgan's only surprise.
And OPFOB would like to offer you a job to start our service dog program.
We started crying and didn't stop for hours. I went from living in my Jeep to getting married, and 6 years later, getting a mortgage-free home. Have hope. Don't give up.
A man trapped in quicksand surprises everyone by making his relationship official during a dramatic rescue call, turning a near tragedy into a quirky love story that's gone viral across social media. Take a look.
It's a love story born out of quicksand. Mitchell O'Brien was strolling at a beach on Lake Michigan looking for rocks with his good friend Bree. Next thing he knew, he's sinking. Mitchell called 911.
So I'm on Vans Beach. My girlfriend and I are here. I walked out a little bit far and stepped in quicksand hole, and my left foot is stuck and I cannot get it out.
Bree headed down the beach for better reception and also called 911.
I'm not sure if my boyfriend has gotten a hold of anybody yet, but he fell into a sand hole and we cannot get him out.
Firefighters and EMTs tied a rope around Mitchell.
One of the guys came in and jumped behind me to get some sand away from my foot, and after that it was just good old-fashioned pulling, crawling as hard as I could and pushing me out from behind.
But who knew that falling in quicksand could also lead to falling in love?
Well, that's a wrap from all of us here at World News Tonight. Up next, Anuradha Vikramasinghe is standing by for the Nightly Business Report. I'm Yasiru Vitana, and we are leaving you with stunning visuals of the Vatican City, the heart of the Catholic faith, and the final resting place of Pope Francis. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.